Thank you so much. Fantastic to be in a room of people that are focused on energy. You work in energy in various formats, you cover energy, you study energy, and if you don't know already, yeah, I love energy. It's just the force that drives change in the world. It's why we live different lives today than our ancestors did throughout all time. It's why the opportunity for our children and grandchildren are going to be so much better. So I am passionate about energy. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. The last time I had a boss, I was 19 years old. And I got a new boss. I didn't know that was going to happen in my life, but it did. And I'll tell you, I'm thrilled. President Trump, East Coast real estate developer, that's not the profile of an energy nerd. But he's passionate about energy. He instinctually gets that energy is at the root of everything. It's the infrastructure of society. It's what defines the boundaries and possibilities of our country, and not just our country domestically. I would say the summary of his policy is prosperity at home and peace abroad. And energy is key to both of those. If you have affordable, reliable, secure, boundless energy in our nation, we can reindustrialize our country, we can lead in AI, we can lower costs and improve the quality of life of all Americans. And beyond that was energy dominance. That's not energy independence, it's beyond that, was to have so much energy and energy technologies that we can help energize our friends and allies around the world. They're relying on adversaries or hostile nations for their energy source. That leaves them hostage and vulnerable. We want to be that supplier, that allied, reliable supplier that helps the world live better, energized lives. And before we go into the dialogue, let me just say quick, we're less than a year into this administration, and honestly, yeah, I do take some pride in the pivot that this administration has made on the state of energy. I would say the great American energy comeback. Less than a year ago, when the administration was inaugurated, we were not issuing any new permits for LNG export terminals. Think about that. The fastest growing energy source in absolute terms over the last 15 years is natural gas. That's the fastest growing new energy source for countries around the world. We had a crisis with a shortage of natural gas in the summer, August, September of 2021. This is never talked about. Natural gas prices on the global market were 5 to 10 times higher than the average. Pakistan shut down a lot of their schools because their buses run on natural gas. India and China banned the export of fertilizer. The single greatest use of natural gas is to create nitrogen fertilizer. If you just get away that one thing we do with natural gas, global food production is cut in half, right? That's billions of people will starve within a year or two. We had a serious shortage in seaborne natural gas. That is when Putin started to move his troops to the border of Ukraine. We only hear afterwards, Putin drove the price rise. No, the crisis in seaborne natural gas was 6 months before the invasion. It led to the amassing of the troops. Putin has wanted that for years, but now his leverage was maximum. Because of policies and decisions, people underappreciating demand for natural gas is growing fast. We didn't build enough infrastructure to supply the world with it, and we led to an energy crisis, ultimately helped set the timing, not the whole cause, but helped set the timing of a brutal war we're still in the middle of. Our goal is to get rid of that. There's 1 billion people that live like us and 7 billion people that want to live like us. The only rational energy policy is that the world needs massively more energy, massively more reliable, affordable, secure energy, and we need to get the politics and the innumerate nonsense out of the way and focus on growing energy production. So obviously we have issued more permits for new LNG export terminals than the capacity to export when we arrived. We will assure that natural gas will continue to grow rapidly around the world, and that the United States will be by far and away the biggest producer of natural gas and the biggest exporter of natural gas, and be able to get Europe the rest of the way off Russian gas, allow so many people around the world to live better lives and rise up. Nuclear, I went to college as a 17-year-old kid to work on nuclear energy. It came out strong out of the gates. It's been stagnant for decades. We've talked for 20 years about a nuclear renaissance. We are going to launch that renaissance. We'll come into that later here. The one thing, biggest challenge, and we'll come back to it as well, is electricity. The United States has tripled our oil production in less than the last 20 years and doubled our natural gas production, but we haven't had much growth at all in our production of electricity. That's a bigger government role, bigger regulatory, and of course, the Democrats who want to assault the production of energy, we're most effective in strangling the growth of reliable, affordable electricity. We're reversing that as well for Americans, for AI, and for our national security. I'll stop there because I could ramble forever and dialogue with my partner, Mark. I want to also thank Mark for his career and his work in energy, in private sector, together with broader industry groups in the Department of Energy. He has been a lifelong and passionate and articulate defender and advancer of energy, Mark. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. That's very kind of you to say. Well, you touched on a lot of what we're going to talk about, so let's circle back. And several in the audience have served at the department, certainly in the government, and we all agree that what we have seen in the first year of the Trump administration over at DOE and the other agencies, it is in fact historic. It is historic. You may not know this because, of course, I would ask you a question is, well, as you know, a CEO, tell me what it's like after having run a company and now you're running a department. But you may not be aware that the year you just went through is not a typical year. And not only is it not a typical year, it's historic. Books will be written about this administration. You remember in 7th grade when you had to memorize all of the department heads? Students are memorizing who you are, and they will be talking about it with their kids when they grow up as to what's been happening. And we can touch about some of the things you all accomplished in the first year. You touched on them. What do you see, what are you most proud of in that first year? And then the next year, what can we expect?
Well, going back in the last year, another thing I should have touched on, the buzz about AI, I think this is transformative technology. I'm very proud of the deals we're making with commercial companies to rapidly get increased computing power to our national labs to drive the pace of scientific advancement, not having to go through a normal procurement process because we're permitting people and allowing them to build on our land, and our compensation is mostly coming in the form of in-kind computing power, massive computing power. But to win in AI and to get reshoring of industry here, by our estimates, we need maybe 50 to more likely closer to 100 gigawatts of expanded capacity for firm generation on our electricity grid. More than 50 gigawatts will be just AI. So we need 100 gigawatts extra. When we arrived, if you looked at the independent system operators across the country in FERC and in DOE, the plan was to close 100 gigawatts of firm generating capacity, and there were plans to build 22 new gigawatts of firm generating capacity. So a net result of a minus 78. If you want to get up a mountain 50 or 100 tall, you don't want to start by digging a 78-foot hole to start in. So one of the things we did is in this year, we've stopped the closure of 17 gigawatts of coal plants. 17 gigawatts is a massive number of gigawatts. Plants that were not closed because they were 100 years old and weren't running anymore, there's a few of those. The vast majority of these were just coal plants that were just slated to close because they were out of fashion. It's good in my state or in my politics to be against coal. Everyone's against coal. I hear that all the time. Well, what do you mean everyone's against coal? It's by far and away the world's largest source of electricity generation. It has been for 125 years. 125-0 is a pretty strong record. And it will be the largest source of global electricity generation for decades to come. That's not opinion or policy. That's just the facts. The second biggest source of global electricity generating is natural gas. Those two and hydro and nuclear, those are the four things that power global electricity. They're the same four things that power United States electricity. We want to expand and protect those. I'm all in on fusion. I'm all in next generation geothermal, all energy technologies that are going to be additive and helpful. Let's do it, as long as they're affordable, reliable, secure.
Yeah, we had prior panels, that talked about the speed to power. Speed to power. We've got to drive, generation sources to power the data centers so that we can all utilize AI. Daniel, that's how I actually discovered that it was your birthday today. I was actually using AI. But I wanted to know right there at that moment. And I think globally, you touched on globally, but here in the United States, right, so we're looking for additive power. So the work that you all did to preserve a generation that was closing, right? That's one way to make up the anticipated supply. But the other way is to build, and you touched on this. There's great technologies ahead. Nuclear serves, a great role. But the fact is, all of our new generation has been renewables and natural gas. Natural gas because they ramp, and if you can get natural gas and you get the turbines, that's what's being built. And so there is this real pressure on the energy industry, the speed to power. I had never heard that phrase before. Being in the power business, it was always get us power, just get us power. But the speed, so that's something new. So if you can comment on that, really our deployment of renewables, natural gas in this country, and touch on the changes in the permitting process, and if you can also maybe touch on the Energy Dominance Council. That has come up in its role in helping to maybe coordinate agency approvals. And
you bet. Well, the Energy Dominance Council, this is a brainchild of Secretary Doug Burgum, friend of mine for 20 years, and President Trump, was we need to elevate energy in the government. It's not just one thing. It's part of our foreign policy. It's part of our use of our interior lands. We need an all-of-government approach to enable the production of energy and enable the growth of energy. Think of President Biden in a campaign. I'm sure you've all seen it. We went over to the young gal and said, I promise you, I will end fossil fuels. That was his passionate appeal because he thought that's what that young gal wanted to hear. Well, when he was inaugurated, United States primary energy was 82% from hydrocarbons, and the day he left office, United States energy from hydrocarbons was 82%. So not really a promises made, promises kept. And if you extrapolate that trend, it's a ways out there, a flat line crossing the origin. But so the idea of the Energy Dominance Council is there's so many, it's all of government barriers to energy development. Again, it's so crazy, I have trouble digesting it. So we need all of government to unravel the things that have been standing in the way of allowing energy development. Whether it's there's a coal mine in Alabama. It's been mining deep underground, mines metallurgical coal, a higher quality coal you use to make steel. You can also use it as thermal coal. And underneath, in a lot of places in our country, there's checkerboards of private land or state land and federal land. So you've got this checkered ownership of minerals at the surface. This mine is underground. It's been mining under the ground for 10 decades, or for decades, not 10 decades. It's been mining underground, but yet it gets to this section, this square mile, it's federal land. It can't mine that coal. They're going to dig around that mile and around here and around the back and do it. Just crazy. It's not like you're stopping a coal mine. It's not like you're doing anything. You're just shrinking the life of these jobs in our supply of met coal. So NEDC, National Energy Dominance, heard this and said, nonsense. Let's go lease that coal. Well, now the government's getting more revenue. Those miners have a longer runway, and the U.S. is going to produce more met coal. A lot of it is just simple common sense stuff. Simple common sense stuff. Electricity prices, they've grown rapidly. People are very upset about that. We've had almost a 30% rise in the average price of electricity, with almost no growth in the production of electricity. So I also think for lower income people, the price of energy, which impacts the price of housing and food and heating and everything else, when you raise the price of energy, you just lower economic opportunity and you make life tougher on people. And again, not that I didn't want to be overly political, but I guess I'm a politician, or a political, whatever I am now, political appointee. But in the Biden administration, they thought by standing in the way of hydrocarbons that somehow that would drive an energy transition. And again, 82% to 82%. Like nothing in the way we get energy changed, but those barriers just mean more cost. If you can't, you can mine this coal, but not that coal underground, guess what? That mine's more expensive now. If you can't get a permit, to drill an oil well, or you got to go through a long process to build a processing plant or build a pipeline, everything becomes more expensive. If you drive up the price of energy, I never know where the win is in that. We saw the United Kingdom and Germany, of course, they did this to extremes. Germany on the electricity grid is just, and yet they wanted to follow that model. Germany, real quickly, Germany had a little over 100 gigawatts of generating capacity on their grid before they started their energy revolution. They spent almost $500 billion in an economy less than an eighth the size of our economy. So that's like us spending, $5 or $6 trillion. Their generating capacity of the grid went from a little over 100 gigawatts to 240 gigawatts. But yet, at the end of that, they produced 20% less electricity than they produced before they spent the $500 billion, and at 3 times the unit cost. And so they just exported their industry, as the United Kingdom did, overseas. Then when Russia invaded Ukraine, things got serious. They realized the mistake they've made. They tore down a wind farm to mine the coal under it in short order. That is the return of energy sobriety. Like, oh my God, we're at a disaster. We've gone a wrong direction. Germany is going to pivot now in their energy policy. All of the European nations, some of them don't say it out loud yet, but all of them, of course, are going to pivot. You can't impoverish your citizens and export your industries and then say you did it to save the planet. Because if the same products are made overseas at a coal-powered factory instead of your own gas factory, they got to be shipped halfway around the world on a diesel-powered ship, is that really a climate policy? I think not. I think not. So that's and we see it in the United States. The states with renewable portfolio standards have 50% higher electricity than the other, a little bit less than half of our states that don't have renewable portfolio standards. I'm all for new technology and new energy. I worked on solar energy years ago. I built chargings for them, thousands of panels around the things. Things have times and places, but massive subsidies, irrespective of the cost, the system cost on the grid, just make no sense at all. And my hope is it's not just the Republicans in power now and the Trump administration, that we will get, and I have had very encouraging dialogues with Democrats in the Senate and the House and governors across our country, that energy should be about 2 things. Humans, the only reason we produce it is to make people's lives better, and math. And math. If you're going to do something that's going to shrink energy supply and make it more expensive, you're not going to benefit a human. Why? We got to stop doing that.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for that. And just to follow on that, so earlier panels had talked about we need everything. I mean, we need every source we can get, right? Maria Korsnick was here.
I disagree with that, by the way.
Okay, well, then why don't you go ahead and let's have this conversation turn on the question.
We need, I'll just say real quick, Mark, we need anything that'll productively add to the energy stack, meaning grow our capacity and lower our costs. I don't care if it's, solar beamed from space or burning green beans. It doesn't matter to me, the source, but the impact of the source matters. The world, if you look at the planet as a whole, we've spent about $10 trillion in theory on a decarbonization battle, mostly on wind, solar, batteries, and the massively extra grid infrastructure that needs to supply those energy sources. Today, they're 2.6% of global primary energy. And in the United States, 3.0% of primary energy. To spend $10 trillion to get almost no net new energy and just get higher expenses, I'm not for that. I'm not for that. But people tell me all the time, we just need more electrons on the grid, just more all electrons. We just need more electrons on the grid. That's not how a grid works. In the middle of the night, when the wind starts to blow in Iowa, what happens? There was hundreds of gigawatts of spare capacity that was not being used at that time, but the wind started to blow, right? So it means a natural gas plant or a coal plant, usually it's a gas plant, reduces its output to displace that solar. We save 2 cents per kilowatt hour by not burning that extra gas. Then we take twice that much money, 4 cents, and mail the production tax credit subsidy to the producer of that wind. That's not counting for the amount the utility pays for that wind and the amount we spent to build all the grid infrastructure to hook that up. Like, that's just a guaranteed way to raise prices. It's just guaranteed. The only thing that's helpful in the electricity grid is if you can increase the supply of peak output, that you have to meet demand at peak output, and you don't know when that's going to happen. But if you're not reliably there to meet peak output, you're just a parasite on the grid. We got 250 gigawatts of idle capacity. If you make me turn it down to do something, that's not additive. If you're there and peak demand is increasingly moving to the winter, when do we have peak demand time? Is a cold, high-pressure system. Think of inauguration last year, crazy cold in this region. A cold, high-pressure system comes in and sits there, and in the evening, you have peak demand time. The sun's not shining. It's a high-pressure system. The wind is not blowing. That's what matters. If you don't deliver electricity, then people die. Hundreds died in Texas, Tropical Storm Uri. And if you look at that data, Texas gets a lot of wind power, and they get a lot of solar power. They lead in those things. At those peak demand times, they're both gone. So what you need in the grid is no different with or without all that wind and solar there. But what isn't different is the cost. You got to have a whole separate generation grid. You have a whole bunch of kit. If we can get energy storage better or cheaper so that you can have meaningful capacity there at peak demand time, not knowing when it's going to be, that's productive for the grid. But reliable, dispatchable, affordable, all energy systems are different. But with electricity, it's just about growing our capacity for peak demand. Everything else doesn't matter.
And just to clarify for the policymakers in the room, your observation that we have 38, 39, maybe 29 states with RPSs, renewable portfolio standards or clean energy standards, that's not to be interpreted as you're calling for a national standard to have a national renewable energy standard, right?
I don't want the 50% higher energy prices. No, I'm saying they've backfired, right? They've on average delivered 50% higher electricity prices.
Right. I mean, similarly, and Congress knows when to get in and get out of these things. I mean, just take the development of hydraulic fracturing. Congress made the decision to let the states decide. So, for example, you go where there's willing. And that's sort of been the theme here, too. I know Mike Summers made the point here that, you really, you look for the states that are willing to help meet our energy demands, to be leaders in producing energy that we can export around. And that's really, you have to call upon, those states to really probably increase, just to carry along the whole government.
Yes.
Right?
I agree with the state choice. I love federalism. We have these laboratories. Different states try different things, and we learn from that. So absolutely, I'm not against it. California has shown us exactly what not to do with energy policy. They had electricity prices a little bit higher than Florida's 15 years ago. They went down the European road. Now they're more than twice as expensive as Florida. And guess what? They produce less electricity today than they did 6, 7, 8 years ago. They've actually, if you make electricity expensive and unreliable, guess what? People will consume less, and as they consume less, your prices will continue to spiral up. That's why data centers are not the problem, they're the answer. North Dakota's had the fastest growth in their production of electricity, 35% over the last 5 years. They're the only state that their nominal electricity prices went down. The states that have had the fastest growth in demand for electricity have had below the rate of inflation rises of electricity prices. The states that have had declining or no growth in electricity in production have had rising prices.
Well, let's see. Let me find a topic you may not be as passionate about. How about Venezuela? your point of view, being in the private sector, right? I mean, you produce energy, and then you see what happens, with Venezuela, a source of oil, natural gas. How do you assess, what's happening there? Not only just Venezuela, but other countries that also have, supplies. You as a U.S. company, how do you factor that into supply and production? When you see these kinds of additional sources potentially coming into the markets?
Yeah, of course, new Venezuelan production, I believe we will see that. Growing Venezuelan production drives prices down. And I've always been that weird guy who spent I've been in many sectors of energy, but mostly in the oil and gas industry, and I've been a little bit lonely in cheering lower oil prices and lower natural gas prices. The shale revolution, just by the straight math, has saved U.S. consumers over $1 trillion every year. It's pushed down oil prices and it's pushed down gas prices. Well, why do I like low prices? Because 100% of Americans consume oil and natural gas every day of their life, and 1% of Americans produce oil and gas. So high prices are a win for 1%. They're overlapping, of course, but it's a loss. It's a net loss for the other 99%. So, and that's what business is supposed to be about, right? Competitive innovation to drive down cost, to deliver products to consumers at ever higher quality and ever lower cost. So yes, I have been a lifelong celebrator of lower oil prices, lower natural gas prices, lower coal prices, lower nuclear power plant costs, lower everything. If you can make energy cheaper, you make people's lives better. So Venezuela, of course, the policy wasn't about that, but it is a great and non-trivial secondary impact of what's going on in Venezuela. I'm sure everybody knows, like Venezuela for 26, now 27 years have been on a downward decline. About a 70% decline in the real GDP. Like, I think only 3 other nations in history have exceeded that degree of plunge in the real GDP of a country. Just a horrible thing for the 30 million Venezuelans. And of course, it gets people into criminality and drugs. And, a failed state has impacts in its neighborhood. It has impacts on the United States. And we've tried all sorts of policies to try to push better behavior in Venezuela over that 20-plus year period. And nothing has worked. And again, President Trump, if nothing else, he's iconoclastic. Well, nothing else has worked. We're going to do something different. And, Biden administration had a $25 million bounty on the head of Maduro and his wife, who were basically narco gangsters. And an incredible military operation without a single loss of American life, took them into custody. We arrested 2 criminals that were highly wanted in our country. And the other side impact is going to be this is tricky. There's challenges along the way, but it's going to likely be a massive improvement in the quality of life for Venezuelans. We're going to see a return of some of the Venezuelan diaspora. We're going to see huge benefits in the United States because energy prices are going to be lower. Criminality is going to be lower. The importing of guns, the kidnapping of Americans and human trafficking are going to go down. But yes, and then we have significant power right now, or influence over Venezuela, not because we have any American boots or guns on the ground, but because we're controlling today. We are controlling the sale of all of their oil and natural gas, and then we are taking those funds and placing them in American-controlled accounts and flowing them back to Venezuela. We're getting about a 30% higher realized price when we sell the same barrel of oil than they sell the same barrel of oil 3 weeks ago. And a quarter or a third of it was leaked out in corruption and was never going back to the government. It was going out to criminal gangs in Cuba and elsewhere around. And internal corruption in their own oil companies. So it's not the desired end state. But today, we have an ability to drive change that could transform a country, transform our relations with that country and conditions of life here with no more bullets fired. It's a challenge, but I'm excited where we are. This is a creative, first of its kind. May not be the last of its kind, but first of the kind attempt to project American power for the betterment of Americans and the betterment of our hemisphere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and I'm from the Gulf of America region, where we were building refineries, engineering refineries, to take the heavy sour from Venezuela. This was before the shale revolution and all the breakthroughs, that you and your company did. But by design, we had great relations back then with Venezuela. A prior panel talked about this. It only made too much sense. And you can go back for 100 years before the Chavez and Maduro regimes. Great relationship. Our willingly. I mean, it was designed to take that specific crude. Project next 4 or 5 years in Venezuela, if political stability there, what would be the best outcome in Venezuela?
So the real quick history, when I was born, Venezuela was the third largest producer of oil in the world. U.S. was number 1, Soviet Union was number 2, Venezuela was number 3 in the world. Venezuela was top 10 in per capita income. Peaceful, thriving democracy. Of course, a lot of money flowing in fast, corruption issues. Not perfect, but a successful nation that was one of the wealthiest nations in Latin America, a great American ally, and of course, top-down control, dictatorship, or whatever, it's fallen down. So the goal is to go back where it was. So in the short term, we saw in Iraq, if you disempower, the debathification, everybody that was in power, everybody that has the guns, and everybody that knows how to run the levers of the civil service and the government, that doesn't go well. So we are dealing with the people with the guns today. We have, I think, the better faction of the people that have the guns in Venezuela, but this is not a democratically elected representative government of the Venezuelan people. We want to keep the nation together. We want to see the economic conditions improve as quickly as possible for the people that live in Venezuela. We want to see the return of rule of law and order. We're going to see, hopefully, significant growth in the economy, make the conditions so American businesses and others will go back into the country and invest, and ultimately on a pathway to a representative government that's chosen and represents the will of the Venezuelan people, that is, again, a peaceful, market-based U.S. ally, star member of our hemisphere. That's the vision.
I'm being told we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask you sort of a two-part unrelated question so that in your closing remarks you can probably address both of these things because I just haven't had a chance to get to them. We talked about energy dominance. We've talked about dominance. We've talked about, winning races, AI. Who are we in the race with? It's China. Technological dominance. Typically, we talk now about China in the energy space, of course, to a lesser degree, Russia. But I want you to talk, if you can, about how you see, U.S. Dominance in those technologies that China's deploying. Also, to touch on critical minerals. I know that you all have taken quite a bit of action to try to reshore, if you will, the critical minerals. We know how dependent we are on China and other countries for certain of these critical minerals. And as you talk about those things, I want you to ask of this audience, from your experience in the private sector, right? You are probably surprised, I'm assuming this when you got to the department, the number of people who show up to ask for something from the government. What would you like to see from the private sector to advance some of these priorities that you talk about? So if you can touch on our competition with China, critical minerals, and then give some suggestions for the private sector engagement. What's helpful?
I'll start with that one. One thing I say, all the people that come visit me in the Department of Energy, people say, what can I do? We want to advance your agenda. And my answer is just to flip it back on them. I'm a capitalist. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. President Trump. America became great because of bottom-up social organization, not top-down social organization. So I view myself and the rest of the administration, we're in the service business. We want to hear from you, your business. What is it you want to invest in that your customers want or that you believe has a future? How can we help you? How can we get barriers out of the way so you can build and grow your business? It's just become very hard to build things in America again. We became an awesome nation, prosperous, wealthy, peaceful nation, because we built giant things, our highway system, our power plants, our cities, our buildings. Boy, you know, they built the Golden Gate Bridge in like 3 years. You know, you couldn't repaint it a different color without a 10-year study and evaluation or whatever. You know, we just made it hard to do things in America. And that's, I think, a grave mistake. We want people to build businesses and people to build things and innovate and experiment in America and let the market forces and your creative ideas and innovation drive where we're going. So what you can do to us is, if there's things standing in the way of you achieving your dream, let us know and we'll see how we can help. Providing money is not one of the main ones. An idea that's viable, generally you got to raise money from your business or in the capital markets and all that. But so we're not a funder of these things. We are a funder in a few areas. Critical minerals, nuclear renaissance, getting these things going again. So we have some role there. But mostly we want to get things out of the way so you can drive the vision you have for your business, your community, and your whatever. Like, that's the America we believe in. That's the America we want to empower. China is different in one respect. In our two races with China, one is China, we were the largest importer of oil in the world, the largest importer of natural gas in the world by far 20 years ago. We were the most dependent. China's taken both of those titles from us. They're by far the biggest importer of oil. They're by far the biggest importer of natural gas. And we've flipped the other way. We are now by far the world's largest exporter of natural gas, and we are one of the larger exporters of oil in the world as well. Like, wow, you know, 2-0 on Team USA. On the electricity sector, it's very different. China's had massive growth in their electricity production, way over twice the electricity we produce in the United States. They've brought industry to their country, and they have invested massively in their electricity sector. They're building a massive amount of nuclear plants, of coal plants, of gas plants, of hydro plants, of wind, solar. China is building, building, building. Now, there's a lot of see-through apartment buildings. I'm not saying China gets everything right on investments, but they are building massively their electrical infrastructure. We need to do that. And to do that, we need to, again, free the marketplace. We've just made the regulatory burden so hard, and these crazy clean power plant rules, you only can build a virtuous power plant. Like, give me a break. And again, if you look at the math on the climate justifications, just, you know, this is like, we're spending $1 and getting a penny or two of benefit. That's just bad investments. So we need to be able to build power in this country, and we're all in on that. But critical minerals is different. This is a one where market forces, where business is free to do what they want to do. We got out of all those businesses because China, for strategic reasons, said, this is not gigantic business. Rare earth elements, for example, and these high temperature, robust magnets that are in every device with a button on it. It's got these magnets in them. China said, we're going to, through non-market mechanisms, dominate that supply chain. If anybody invests in it, we're going to crash the price of it. So all of our automakers, electronics makers, airplane, everybody buys these magnets for really cheap. Well, hey, that's great in our capitalist world. The problem is we don't have an ability to produce them without China, and nor does the rest of the world. Their dominance is so large that it gives them leverage. You want us to shut your factories down? They have a way to do it. And we cannot stay in that position we're in today. So here, we can't tell anybody, yeah, I tried to get in that business twice before and they bankrupted my business. Come on, patriotic, do it a third time. We can't do that. We have to strike different deals. We want you to do that. We'll give a price floor. We'll give a guarantee. We'll invest some equity capital. So we're having to intervene into markets for strategic reasons. We're trying to do it as business and non-corrupting of the incentives way as possible, but we're having to lean in and get people to mine things, process things, and manufacture things that are critical to our national defense and to our infrastructure that everybody pulled out of for economic reasons. But it matters, and we are moving. We have weekly meetings. This is a whole of government thing. There are a number of just awesome American companies that are saying, we're in, we can work out the, big companies, little companies, but we need, look, China's a huge economy. They're going to be around for a long time. It's not like we're going to be completely isolated from China, but we cannot let them have the leverage they have over us today. That can't maintain. By the end of this, by a year from now, we'll be way better off than we are today. And by the end of this administration, they should no longer have leverage in those areas over us. That's the plan.
Fascinating discussion. I committed to staff to keep you on schedule. I know we could go on for another hour, but thank you so much, Secretary, for joining us today and giving us those fantastic insights. Please join me in thanking the Secretary and giving him a happy birthday applause.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all so much. Thank everyone so much. Thank you for energizing our country. Keep doing it and let us know if we can help. If there's things in your way, we want to help.